From the onset, may I state clearly that in the view of government, the current demonstrations that we have been witnessing is not informed by the concern about the cost of living, but it is largely influenced by the fact that a section of the political class, to date, despite having exhausted all the legal mechanisms through which election disputes can be alleviated, still are not convinced that they are out of government. And the cost of living and the demonstrations emanating therefrom is a disguise as opposed to the reason for the current demonstrations that we are witnessing. While we accept and recognize the fact that our Article 37 of the Kenyan Constitution, our 2010 constitutional dispensation, allows for demonstrations and picketing, the position of government is that such demonstrations and picketing must be exercised or undertaken within the confines of the law. And those confines of the law, or the ambit of the law, is clear that picketing and demonstrations should not lead to destruction of people's property. It should be done in a peaceful manner. In the same vein, let me also state that the right to property and life is a fundamental and a cardinal principle of the law that the government remains alive to and will go out of its way to protect. Irrespective of whose property it is, the government will protect the property of each and every Kenyan. If the property of an itinerary trader operating downtown on River Road is destroyed, it is as painful as would be the case when the property of the high and mighty is destroyed. What I'm saying, ladies and gentlemen, is that the rule of law clearly articulates that each and every Kenyan is equal before the law. Each and every Kenyan is equal before the law. And the government will protect the property and lives of each and every Kenyan indiscriminately. Considering the riots that we witnessed last week on Monday, and informed by the fact that the opposition again, through its leadership, Mr. Raila Odinga, called for subsequent demonstrations this week, Monday, the government went out of its way to put in place an elaborate mitigation framework to ensure that a repeat of destruction of property is not witnessed within the CBD. Adequate security was deployed by government within the central business district, and with the efforts of the demonstrators led by the political class under the tutelage and stewardship of Raila Odinga having been thwarted and failing to gain access into the CBD, they went into the environs of the city. And under the guise of exercising their democratic rights, whipped up sentiments which led to destruction of property, including but not limited to the burning of a police vehicle, GKB 856D, a Toyota Corolla belonging to the Kenyan police. Such acts of violence, especially when being meted on government property or the property of anybody else for that matter, cannot be entertained. And the government will not entertain that moving forward. We are aware that against the background of the government having deployed heavy security within the CBD, certain hooligans also invaded private property elsewhere, took advantage of that. Such acts are regrettable, just as the act we have witnessed downtown on River Road, directed at small business enterprises. And the government has put in place or launched investigations to ascertain who could have been behind the invasion of such property, while at the same time also undertaking comprehensive investigations to determine who could have been behind the invasion and destruction of property belonging to common traders within the environs of the city. Let me state, ladies and gentlemen, without fear of contradiction, that in this country, over the past 3 decades, we have witnessed a systematic pattern where people who are dissatisfied with the results of elections resort to acts of violence as a way and means of intimidating the duly elected government into submission. The Kenya Kwanza government, under the tutelage of His Excellency President William Samoei Ruto, respects the rule of law, respects the Constitution, and will uphold it to the letter. For avoidance of doubt and for purposes of clarity, under no circumstances will the current government be cowed into submission through acts of violence and intimidation which are outside the confines and ambit of the law. If it has happened before that through acts of violence and intimidation we have ended up with Nusumkati governments, if I may use that phrase, it does not mean that it will happen with the current government or any other government for that matter in the foreseeable future. If anything, it should not. We must accept to operate within the confines of the law, where we go for elections every 5 years. The winner assumes office, the loser accepts the results and congratulates the winner, and all Kenyans put the elections behind and move forward as one united country. That is what we would wish to see. And by extension, we want to thank Kenyans for peacefully going back to their daily undertakings subsequent to the 2022 elections. It was a sign of maturity. It was a sign that our country has finally become of age and our democracy has matured, that we can go to elections today and tomorrow we are back to our daily undertakings, despite the fact that there was a winner and a loser in the elections. And that is what our 2010 constitutional dispensation advised, and that is what we appeal to Kenyans to continue upholding. We also want to appeal once more to Kenyans to continue with what they have exhibited in the recent past of ignoring unnecessary calls by politicians to resort to acts of violence or to stop them from going for their daily-to-daily activities. The government has put in place elaborate mechanisms to ensure that the lives and property of Kenyans will be protected, that those Kenyans who want to go to work and undertake their daily course continue doing so without intimidation from any quarter, the political class inclusive. We are aware that a section of the political class in the opposition, led by Raila Odinga, has again called for another set of demonstrations on Thursday. Let us take this opportunity to assure Kenyans that the government will put in place adequate security measures to ensure that all Kenyans are able to undertake their daily course without intimidation from any quarter. Go ahead with your businesses as usual. The government is firmly in a position to create an enabling environment to ensure that you will not be intimidated by anybody from any quarter whatsoever. Let me also espouse one thing, that the only means of forming government is through our electoral process. And that process is very, very clear. And it is well defined in the minds of Kenyans. You will not use an orthodox means of getting into government, either fully or partially through an orthodox means. It is not a walk in the park. You have to seek the mandate of Kenyans to become part of government or to form government. So it's not just a question of telling Kenyans that let's converge and march to State House. It will not happen because it is against the law. And if you think that that is the approach that you are going to use to intimidate William Ruto into submission, then please get it from government that you will wait for a long, long time. You will wait for a long, long time. It will not happen. We have one government in place under William Ruto for the next 5 years up to 2027. Anybody who is not happy with the outcome of those elections, having exhausted the legally acceptable mechanisms of addressing electoral grievances, can wait for 2027. As Kenya Kwanza government, we are not going to engage in politics between now and 2027. If we are to engage in any politics, it will be politics of the economy, because we are concerned about the fundamental challenges facing the common mwananchi. We are not going to engage in any politics between now and 2027. And we are appealing to all segments of the political class to take cue and follow suit. Those are my brief comments on behalf of government. We do not support attacks on the media. We expect that the media will undertake its roles and responsibilities informed by their mandate, impartially, but also within the confines of the Media Code of Conduct and relevant laws, regulations, and constitutional provisions. But we also expect responsible journalism from the media. Let us not use inflammatory language. So let us not, within the ambit of undertaking our journalism, use language which scares investors or causes unnecessary insecurity in the country.
Is in regard to Kibra, and this has to do with the freedom of worship. Today, a church is banned, a mosque is partially banned. What is the position of the government?
The government respects the rule of law. And our recent history is awash with examples where the government has gone out of its way, not just to conform to judicial rulings, but also conform to the dictates of the Constitution. That is the position of government. As and when the court pronounces itself on any matter, the government will abide to it.
Sorry, Waziri, but don't you think it's a give and take, because some of you are saying that you're following the rule of law, but yet other people are reporting to office. Yesterday, the deputy president had cases in his office.
Yes.
The Prime Cabinet Secretary.
It is actually subject to how you want to interpret the law. You are aware that these cars were actually appointed when there was no injunction in place to the contrary. So it's a question of how we juggle around the law moving forward. But the position of government, from one side, one may argue that the cars have got the right to report to office. Somebody else may argue that they cannot report to office depending on the cost of ruling. One may argue that this recent court ruling came after the cars had already been legally appointed. But we leave that to those who are acting within that space of our judicial framework to execute that issue to a logical conclusion.
Are you going to have moderation, to have a dialogue between the opposition and government, or you're just sticking to continue the way you're continuing?
The government has always stated that it is willing to dialogue with any integral segment of the Kenyan society on issues to do with the economy. But we are not going to open a window for political dialogue because there is no provision within the law that we can exploit to get into political dialogue. If any Kenyan comes up with a viable proposition to address economic issues, the government is ready and willing to engage it because the window is open, legally and otherwise, for government to do that. But we will not engage into negotiations or dialogues that are anchored on political discourse. As a government, the official position of government is that we are focusing on revitalizing the economy, which economy we got on its deathbed when the Kenya Kwanza government came into office.